Hi everyone, welcome back into the classroom. Well, we're going to continue on with some of our studies. Now in this series, Painting for Spring, we're going to do a little color theory, we're going to do a little preparation, show you different ways I did the boards. I did that yesterday. I'm going to do a little bit of pigment study again today. We're going right into where we can go paint some of these wonderful little forget-me-nots. I love the little forget-me-nots. I had these in my flower beds out in Pennsylvania. I love these little guys. Always would come up in early spring. And of course, it all depends on where you live, where spring is, you know. And because we've noticed out here in Nebraska, the spring's later than it is in Pennsylvania. But anyway, so we want to talk about some of those colors, and they're beautiful colors. They're going to go all the way from the turquoise here up through the periwinkle. So let's talk about how we're going to make some of those colors. First, let's go back to our 12 color wheel, which we were talking about before. You have, and how we name colors, because today that's going to make a big difference to what what's blues and what colors you're going to change. And this is why. In the older original color wheel, we used to name them primaries, the three, red, yellow, blue, secondaries, orange, green, and violet. And then you would name these right in here. In between these were called intermediates. They were not called tertiary. Today, a lot of wheels call it tertiary. In the nomenclature of color, in the nomenclature of chemistry, where we all started this out, nomenclature means we would name a color or a specific pigment by what's inside it. Okay, Quinacridone Violet, and it's the acridone molecule that's inside it, and quin, of course, being the number of those molecules coming together. There is a lot of different ways in which we name it, but we name it by the compounds of what's in it. So the primary was one. There is no simpler way you can break down color. The secondary means that it contains two. It contains two primaries. So green contains those. Orange contains the red and yellow, and violet contains the blue and red. The intermediates, why we called them intermediates, because there is no third element in here. This just red-orange is red and yellow, but it's heavier to the red side. Yellow-orange is yellow and red, and it's heavier to the yellow side. So you name it by what is the most in that compound there, okay? And so red-orange is the secondary orange plus red makes the primary. You name it by the primary, then the secondary. But what's most important about that is it is not a tertiary color. A tertiary colors belong inside the wheel. This is where your grays. Burnt sienna is a tertiary color. Burnt umber is a tertiary color. English red oxide is a tertiary color. How do you get that? What does that mean? It means that it gets a little bit grayer, okay? But ultimately, what it means is that color that you are making contains all three, tertiary, all three primaries, okay? Now, a lot of what I do, now you watch me paint in videos and you see me make colors really, really quick, right? And I grab them because I know these colors. I know everything about them. It's no different than, let's say that you're a pilot, you go walking into the cockpit of an airplane and you see all these buttons and switches and all that kind of stuff. Well, a good pilot knows what every one of those buttons are. And a good artist will know, even if you have to simplify your palette, will know what their colors do. And the most important is, do their colors sit primary, or do they sit secondary, or do they sit tertiary? Let me show you why, okay? So it's very important. So you have this. So then we have the pigment wheel. Now, let's take a look. I put out here two colors. All right, I put out an ultramarine blue and a phthalo blue. The phthalo blue is what we're using in the system here, okay? Now, the ultramarine blue sits here. So what's the difference between phthalo blue and ultramarine blue? Here is your primary, what we call the spectrum line of blue. So ultramarine blue sits to the red side of blue. Phthalo blue sits to the green side of blue, or we call an ultramarine blue a blue violet, and we call a phthalo blue a blue green. Okay, it leans blue. But ultimately what that means is, what is pulling the blue this way? Yellow. Because everything we break down in the nomenclature of color down to the three primaries. So it is basically, phthalo blue is a blue, but it's actually a secondary blue. That's what's carrying it over to the greenish side slightly. And the ultramarine blue is a secondary blue, carrying it slightly to the red side. So you don't see this. Let's take ultramarine blue. And if you add the white out here like this, you'll see what it is. This is a more of a blue violet, okay? And then let's add the phthalo blue over here. You will see this one is more of a blue-green. So it's going to sit, let's go a little lighter here, Dave. So it'll sit a little bit more blue-green, right? And so definitely, one second I put this out, this one definitely looked more violet, didn't it? Yeah. So it heads more towards the blue violet and towards the blue green. Really beautiful blues, cobalts, all those kind of sit a little closer to the line. When we make other pre-mixed colors like sapphire and stuff, we mix these two together. We take these two together and we make a beautiful blue right here into the center, which would be a sapphire blue, a pre-mixed sapphire blue that is neither blue violet nor blue green. It is more of a blue. So you get those together, you get more of a blue. Now, what does all of that mean? Well, Dave, it's a bright blue. What difference does it make? It makes every difference in the world, guys. Especially if you go into make some of those really, really beautiful greens. For example, let's take a bit of, let me move this over so we don't dirty up all of my palette there. So let's just take some phthalo blue. Now, which blue would make better greens? Phthalo blue or ultramarine blue? It will be phthalo blue. If I take just a little bit of my phthalo blue here, and if I take some of the Hansa yellow light, and it takes just a little bit, you see I get a nice, beautiful, bright green. And if I want that to be brighter, I can instantly get it brighter to stay over more towards the yellow greens. And it takes just a whisper, just wave it over the surface there. It doesn't. Phthalo blue is so powerful, right? And so let's go with the ultramarine blue. Now, ultramarine blue isn't nearly as powerful as phthalo blue. It's about 1/4 of the power of phthalo blue, but it will make greens, but it does one thing. The greens become a little bit more of an olive green. Now, why does that happen? Why does this green become a little bit more of an olive green and it's just a little bit more olive than it does here? What's the one color that's being added into, how do you make an olive green? What's the one color that's actually going into that? It's red. See? So if I just took a little bit of Naphthol Red Light and start adding that to it, I'll get the color really, really close. So what's the difference between phthalo blue and ultramarine blue? Ultramarine blue leans red, phthalo blue leans yellow. And in this green mix, I was taking ultramarine blue and yellow, and I was taking phthalo blue and yellow. And in this one, there is no red. Does that make sense? Because it's leaning completely on the secondary side basically from the yellow to the blue. And this other one, ultramarine blue, is leaning to the violet side, right? Which has red in it. So if I wanted to make this color right here, and I wanted it to make it look more like that, what's the difference between these colors? This is a tertiary, this is a secondary. This is a tertiary green, this is a secondary green. And if I want to make it a little bit more like that, I need to add the tertiary component, probably just a little more blue into it, but I need to add the tertiary component of this, which is the red. So I can nail it down really, really close just by adding a little more yellow and a little more red, and I will make the same color, right? Because I realize this one, that one there, when I mix the ultramarine blue, which was this, it's a blue violet, right? So this is the blue violet here, right? This is my blue violet that's making this green, and this is my blue green up here, and it takes just a little bit of that. This is my blue green up here making those brighter greens. And so those greens up at the top up there will be brighter because there's one color missing. red, okay? And that's when I look through it, all of this can be so darn confusing. That's why this pigment wheel is so important to you guys, because it tells me ultramarine blue is a blue with some red in it, and it tells me that phthalo blue is a blue with some yellow in it, which makes it green, okay? And so I know what's going to happen with those colors. Now, let me ask you here, and this, as soon as this gets in here, and it's not easy, okay? I've been doing color theory. Well, I started it out in college and stuff, so over 40 years. And I'm still amazed by God's colors every day about how he makes some of this stuff. But if I take phthalo blue, so we know phthalo blue is what? Is phthalo blue. And a lot of people would say, okay, let's make a real bright violet. Let's make a bright violet, okay? So I'm going to take phthalo blue here. And then, boy, this red, Naphthol Red Light, is a real bright red. So a bright blue and a bright red should make a bright purple, right? No. This is one of my favorite colors for rocks in landscapes, these two together. And it doesn't. So if I mix these, if I take this red here and I add a little, because it only takes a little, start adding a little bit of blue and you think, oh, I'm going to get a beautiful purple color here. No, you don't. You get what we call a grayed color. That's not a, let's add a little white to it and let's just check that out. That's gray. That's gray. And I can make it more a cooler gray with a little more blue in it. This is the color I love to use for rocks and stuff. But why does that go? Now let's try the same thing now. So I have my phthalo blue, and this is one reason why I have this out. So I have my phthalo blue. This time, let's not add the Naphthol Red Light. Let's add the Quin Violet over here. So we'll take just a little bit of this. We'll add this to it. And all of a sudden, we're going to get a nicer purple here, a nicer violet. We'll add a little white so you can see that nice. It's a nicer violet. So adding the Quin and adding here. Let's look at the pigment wheel. Why did this go gray? Or in the proper term, we would say this is a tertiary color, okay? This right here is a secondary color. What's the difference? How do I know? You see, what makes everything so important, guys, is that third element, the tertiary element. The third element in any mix is going to gray down your color. And you have to keep in your mind all the time, I'm thinking primary, secondaries, tertiaries. If I want to make any color, if I want to make it grayer, if I want to make this color gray, what is missing? How do I know this is more of a, well, let me just say this. It is a secondary, I mean, it is a tertiary color, but it's not as tertiary. What do I mean by that? Blue, well, first let's do this, okay? I don't want to confuse you too much. Here's ultramarine blue. This is a blue leading violet, and here's a violet. This will make a prettier violet than these two. And I know that for a fact. And it's brighter, it's a prettier, and it's brighter. And I know it's going to be brighter because the third element is missing. While there's just a tiniest bit of yellow over here to make it go green, there's none here. So if I mix ultramarine blue and I mix Quinacridone Violet, which is right there, those two, I'm on this side. I'm working between between the primary red and the primary blue. If I go over here to phthalo blue, it will still make a violet. And if you draw the lines, I showed you before, you draw the lines. If I draw a line between here and here, the violets I make along this line are out here, out this side. As you go further into the wheel, they become more tertiary because the third element is pulling the color in. So if I add phthalo blue and Quinacridone Violet, it's going to make a better purple, but it cannot make as bright a purple as this one. That purple will be right in here, and this one will be here. So you got one here, and you have one here, right? And what happens when I add the phthalo blue and the Naphthol Red Light, which is what I did up here? It does not go through violet. It goes through the grays, right almost to black. Do you see that? That line goes almost to black, right through there. Does not go up through the violets. And that's the color that I get, almost black, right where that black is sitting. And if I add a little more red to it, I can make this, I could really, truly make this more into a burnt sienna or something like that. So how do I know that? Well, what is blue? What is phthalo blue? Phthalo blue is a blue that leans green. What's making it green? Blue and a tiny bit of yellow. Naphthol Red Light is a red. It's a red that leans yellow. So what's making this red go this way on the wheel? We call it a red-orange. What's making it that orange? Yellow. So when I'm mixing phthalo blue, Naphthol Red Light, I'm mixing up blue, red, and colors that lean yellow. So all three of the main primaries are in there, and that's what makes it tertiary, and that's what gives you dirt, gives you grayness, right? When I mix the violet over here, that's very, very bright. There's no yellow in it. There's no yellow. This one, you can see it's not quite as bright, but why did it gray down just a little bit more than, say, this one does here? And I can make that one a little bit more red so you can see the real difference between them. Why is this one a little brighter than that one? And that is because, and they're close, but you can see the difference of it. In a painting, it will make a ton of difference. Is because this one, the phthalo, has the tiniest bit of yellow pulling that tertiary. So which means if I add just the tiniest bit of yellow, just any kind of yellow into here, I'm going to start creating that other grayed color. The color is going to start, and the Hansa yellow is not a real great color to do this with. There's better ones. But you can see immediately the violets start to gray down. Right? They start to gray down because I'm adding the third primary. I'm making it tertiary. And that's what's so important about all your color mixing, is making it tertiary. Remember I said to you, how do you take an orange and make a burnt sienna? You make it tertiary. You could make any color, any burnt sienna, like I showed you before. I can take yellow. I can take a little bit of red into my yellow here and start, a very nice orange, right? And let's just brighten that up just a bit here. And then how do I make this, more of a burnt sienna color? You need to make it tertiary, and you can get that by ultramarine blue or phthalo blue. Both will do it, right? I just take it, but phthalo blue is a little harder. It just takes the tiniest little bit of this into these colors here, and you can see it starting to gray down, and I'll increase the red. I know it needs to go just a little bit more red, and I start making the burnt sienna colors, the colors of burnt sienna right there, right? And I know how to make those because I know burnt sienna is tertiary. Burnt sienna is a tertiary orange. It is red and yellow, and then you lean it, you pull it into the wheel this way, but you can see where it is, okay? So there's the burnt sienna, and it pulls into the wheel this way because the blue pulls it into the wheel. Now, the phthalo blue pulls it down slightly to the green. The ultramarine blue would pull it down slightly to the violet side. But they would still all make beautiful burnt siennas, right? So between the two blues, which they'll both make green, which one makes the brightest green? Phthalo blue. Which one makes the brightest violets? Ultramarine. Now, phthalo blue, but it's so powerful. Phthalo blue is powerful, and it's got just the tiniest bit of yellow. Not enough to throw out a really beautiful violet, right? That's why that's one reason why in all my pigments, in all of the colors like Dave's favorites, you see me heavy, you see me one blue, but heavy in the red violet and quinacridone violet. That is because I choose that phthalo blue. I know I've got to go heavy violets to help make those beautiful purples and stuff like that through the composition. Because my blue, it's a great mixing blue. Phthalo blue is a great mixing blue, but it leans yellow. And so it will give me cloudy violets unless I have a real powerful violet. Does that make sense? And so the ultramarine blue makes beautiful, beautiful violets, but lousy greens because it has reds in it. Unless you want your greens more tertiary, more toned, it makes beautiful greens that way. I know that I can always make, though, that real tone. You can always make a tertiary, but you can't get a bright color. So that's why we choose bright colors. So when you're looking at your pigments, I pick Phthalo Blue, and then I pick Quin because it's way out here as a Quinacridone Violet. The 122 is a real bright little violet. And so I know my purples will come right along this line. I don't need to make them a little bit brighter by using the ultramarine here, unless I have something that really leans a lot of blue. But then when I go look at the flowers and stuff that we're going to be painting with, these little guys, these little forget-me-nots and stuff, I'm going to be able to make, you know, some really, really pretty blues here. And even take over to, so here's this blue, see, and this blue violet that I just made. I'll make that color. So I'll be able to make those colors right away, right with this, with Phthalo Blue and my violet. Because my violet is so powerful, I'll be able to make all those beautiful blues there. And if I want to lean it a little more, this is a blue violet, this is a blue green. If I want to lean that a little bit more blue green, I add just a little bit more of the phthalo, less of the violet, and then I'll take that from a blue violet to a blue green, and I start hitting the blue green up here. Does that make sense? So I know how to drive my colors. That's where we're going to go. So we can go even a little lighter yet, because that phthalo is so powerful. Have you learned that yet? Phthalo is really, really powerful here. So there you go. There's your colors there. So here's your violets right down here. Here's your, let's just set that right there. So that is going to be, when we go to paint these little forget-me-nots, those are the main colors we'll use. You can see all of those colors here. So I can make those colors really easy from Phthalo Blue and my violet. But I have that Quin Violet because my Phthalo Blue, even though it's a blue, it leans, I always think in my mind it's got a tiny bit of green in it, which is the yellow, which if I mix it with a red, I get a tertiary color really quick. And tertiary is dirty gray color. Those are the colors that are inside the wheels. So now you know here why we call the tertiary colors in here. The three primaries together make gray. They make gray. That's where all your earth colors come from. That's where all your toned raw siennas, burnt siennas, and any color that's slightly gray. Or in any time in a painting, if I want to make a color slightly gray, so I'm here in making this green. I identify it as a green. And anytime I want to do that, and I want to gray it, I can pull any color from here to pull it in the wheel. If I pull it violet, if I take a little bit of my violet here, violet will gray it. Not as quickly, but violet will gray it. And you'll see, here it goes, grayer right here, right? Let's add just a touch of white to that so you can see. It goes gray, pretty easy, see? I get a real gray green, get a brighter green, get a gray green. If I add the Naphthol Red Light, it goes even quicker. It goes really fast to the gray because the Naphthol Red Light has already got two main components in it that are quite heavy. It goes gray really quickly. Let's just look at a little bit of that up. You can see I can make all kinds of variations. So with this palette, I can make all kinds of greens, and this is why sometimes you see me add a little this, add a little that, because I'm driving that color through the wheel. Does that make sense? I'm driving it through the wheel to one specific area of the wheel where I want to see that color, and I know how to drive it. But the main thing that starts me on this journey through my wheel, is it a primary, is it a secondary, or is it a tertiary? And so when today, a lot of today's wheels go out and call this a tertiary color, what do you call the colors in the center? What are you calling those in the center? What is driving it to the center? The other primary. So if I mix these together, I get all this. But what causes a color to pull in this way? This color does. And when I add all three together, I get three tertiary. Does that make sense? So that is why I am constantly thinking, if I want a blue sky and I want it to go violet, I look at the sky, yeah, my phthalo can make a color that bright. Ultramarine blue is a beautiful blue and can be used for that and will make it really, really easy. Phthalo maybe not quite so easy, but if I shift that sky going down the horizon line like I like to do, down into the warmer summer skies, you'll get yellows along the horizon line. Phthalo blue accepts that easier than ultramarine blue, because ultramarine blue has a little bit of red, and instead of staying kind of a blue or kind of going greenish, yellowish, greenish, it goes gray with ultramarine blue because you're adding that other element in there. Okay, you're getting it tertiary. There's a whole bunch of stuff to kind of remember. You're never going to be able to remember every single pigment. You know, I mean, I know them now. I know all the colors, all the colors that we use to make pigments and stuff like that. There's over 400 current pigments. I know them. I know them really well, and there's certain ones that I avoid, that I don't use at all because they're fugitive or they may be heavy metal triggers for health reasons and stuff like that. So I stay away from them. But the thing that is the most important, the first switch you throw in that cockpit as you're going to take off and stuff like that, is you find out what your color is. Is that blue a secondary? Is it a primary? And as you're adding stuff together, is it going tertiary, coming into the wheel, going gray, or is it staying outside the wheel in between those two colors? Is the green going tertiary, or is the green going staying secondary? Does that make sense? Yeah. And so if I take Phthalo Blue and I take Hansa Yellow, I'm making a secondary green. It's going to be very bright. That's a secondary green. And it's going to stay very bright because there's no red in it. But if I make it with the ultramarine blue, that's a blue leaning red, it's going to go a little bit grayer. And so I can make really, really bright, pretty greens with my phthalo. Ultramarine will make them, but they won't be quite as pretty. They'll start to go a little olive, which is going into the wheel, giving you that grayness, okay? All right? So that is the blues. And so when we go to mix our flowers here, we'll do that in the painting here. I'm going to go right into painting it here this afternoon. We're going to paint some little forget-me-nots here. And we're going to make we need to make some of these pretty little violet colors that you see here onto the buds and stuff there. And I know, they're not really super bright. They're a little bit grayed and stuff. So I know my phthalo blue and my violet, my quinacridone, will make all of those. I'll shift between blue greens and blue violets and all the way up to violet really easy, because even though it's slightly grayed, I don't need to grab ultramarine blue because they're not as bright as what I can already make with my phthalo. And if you do a few of these exercises, learn what these colors can make, or follow along my lessons. When you're following along my lessons, guys, I want you to listen very closely to what it is that I'm saying. Why am I taking phthalo blue and that red, Naphthol Red Light? Because I want that to go to a tertiary gray. And I know if I want to lean it more orange, I increase the red orange in it, the Naphthol Red Light. If I want it to go a little cooler, shadowy colors, darker, more like black, I increase the phthalo blue into it. Okay? And if I want to make one that's just more pure violet, then I'll take that and I'll take the phthalo blue and add the quinacridones and stuff like that that keep the yellow out of the system. Does that make sense? Or at any time, so if I'm over here and you're identifying a lot of green and I want to tone that down, I want to gray that green's too bright for me. I got to take the green this way. Anything from over here. You see me a lot of times in videos pull burnt sienna, which sits right here, right? We know from our color chart, burnt sienna sits right here. So if I'm in a green, burnt sienna is going to take it here. It's eventually going to go to the fall green colors, which are right in there, right? The spring green colors are right in here. The falls are right in here. And so I know how to get there. You know how to get there. And sometimes in those backgrounds, you might see some of those grayed colors right back in here in those backgrounds. And then they'll get a little bit brighter as they get right up here. I know, I look at this color and I'll go, oh yeah, well, let's add just a touch more. I'm almost out of yellow here. But if I add, see, look at that yellow green, there it is. If I add that into that, I'll get there. But that grayer one would look pretty back in here. Does that make sense? That's how it works. So when you're listening to this stuff, guys, listen to what I'm saying about the mix. And always, your journey starts right now with, is it a tertiary or is it secondary? Any color that you're mixing, is it primary, secondary, or tertiary? And if you're looking at the mix and you're identifying, yeah, there's actually three of the primaries in there, you're going gray. Or if you want to go gray, then you have to add that third primary in there and pull it into the wheel. And that's why the nomenclature of color, I've been a big advocate for years, and of course I'm just one voice, of calling these things. You have to go back to a color theory book before 1940 to really see it. But and I have them in my collection. I have old antique theory books, and these are called, these colors here in old antique theory books are called intermediates because the nomenclature of color. And today people call it the third mix. They're tertiaries. And that, the nomenclature of color doesn't mean how many times you've mixed it down. It means what's inside it. Okay, table salt, NaCl, sodium chloride. It's what's inside it. That's what we, that's how we name it and stuff like that. So anyway, okay, I hope that works. So as you're going through the lessons, start identifying in your mind, throw a couple of switches there. You're going to learn with these switches, primaries, secondaries, and tertiaries, as we take off and try to paint some of these different things. Put those into your mind, okay? And we'll go into a lot more detail stuff as we get going, what I'm thinking about. But I'll be able to look at any color, and I know what to mix it, because then I got to decide. First thing I decide is it gray enough? And if it's not gray enough, what am I going to add to make it gray? And I usually lean first to the element that's missing. Does that make sense? To what do I have to do to take it into the wheel? Okay? All right. So next lesson, let's go in and let's go paint some of those forget-me-nots and practice some of these beautiful little blues together for that. All right? All right. See you guys over there.